Petra Nemcova, 8 hours on a palm tree. On December 26, 2004, 25-year-old Czech supermodel Petra Nemcova was in her beach bungalow at Khao Lak, Thailand, with her boyfriend, 33-year-old British fashion photographer Simon Attlee. Their bags were already packed. They were about to check out. That morning, Petra had walked near the shoreline and noticed something strange. The water had pulled back unusually far from the beach. She assumed it had something to do with the full moon. She was wrong about that. But she noticed. She looked at the ocean and registered that something was different. That small moment of attention is the only reason she survived what came next. At 9:40 a.m., she heard screaming outside the bungalow. She looked up. She saw people running past the window. Then the wave came through. The windows exploded inward. The water hit total and violent. It took Simon and Petra and everything in the room and pulled them outside into the current. The last thing she heard was Simon calling her name. Then the current took her. She was swept into a current of debris moving at tremendous speed. Broken buildings, fallen trees, entire pieces of the resort. At one point, she stopped fighting it. She said afterward, "I couldn't breathe anymore. I thought, that's it. That's my last moment." And I let go. And then she found the tree. She wrapped her arms around the trunk and stayed there. She was badly hurt. In the first minutes, the force of the water had shattered her pelvis in 4 places and caused internal bleeding. She could not move her legs. She could not swim toward anyone. She could only hold the tree. This was the moment Petra Nemcova chose to survive. She felt panic rising and made a deliberate decision to stop it. She said, "I went into this stillness, into almost like a meditative state, because I knew if I start panicking, you lose more energy. And I needed all my energy to keep alive." She stayed there for nearly 8 hours. Around her, people screamed for help. Children screamed. She could hear every voice. She could not get to any of them. She was pinned to the tree by her broken pelvis. She could not let go without drowning. She listened and could help none of them. As the hours passed, the water began to drop, slowly, inch by inch. The voices around her became fewer. She said later that she spoke to God during those hours. She prayed. She made a promise. If she survived, she would do something with it. The tree held. The water kept dropping. She kept holding. Khao Lak sat on a flat coastal plain with no high ground nearby, nowhere to run, no elevation to reach. The entire resort strip where Petra and Simon had been staying was completely erased. In Khao Lak alone, the death toll ran into the thousands, including hundreds of Scandinavian tourists who had come for the Christmas holiday. It was one of the single deadliest locations of the entire tsunami. When rescuers finally found her, her clothes had been torn off by the force of the water. Strangers, Thai civilians, gave her clothes, placed her on a floating mattress, and pushed her through the debris toward the road. She said, "Those people were ready to risk their lives for strangers, and that shows you the best of humanity." She was airlifted to a hospital. Doctors told her it was not clear whether she would ever walk again. She spent months in rehabilitation. She said she focused on what still worked: her hands, her eyes, her ears. She taught herself to think that way every single day. Simon Attlee's body was found and formally identified on March 3, 2005, 67 days after the tsunami. He was 33 years old. He was one of approximately 5,000 people killed in Thailand that day. She was in one of the worst hit areas in Thailand, with a shattered pelvis in the water. A single palm tree held on, so did she. Ari Afrizal, 15 days alone in the ocean. On the morning of December 26, 2004, 21-year-old Ari Afrizal was on a scaffolding on a construction site near Kalang, in the Aceh Jaya region of Sumatra, Indonesia. He was a carpenter. He was hammering nails into a plank, building a beach house on the coast. It was a normal morning. At 7:58 a.m., the ground started shaking. Not a short tremor, a sustained massive shake that did not stop. The 9.1 magnitude earthquake lasted over 2 minutes. Ari and his crew climbed down and moved onto open sand. They crouched and waited for it to stop. Then they looked up and saw the ocean. The wave made a sound before it arrived. Ari described it later as a low, deep roar, like nothing he had ever heard. Then it hit the beach houses at the construction site with a sound he described as fang, fang. One after another, each structure flattening on impact. The wave was enormous. It picked Ari up and threw him 1,500 feet inland. He slammed into a mango tree and grabbed a branch. He held on. Looking around, he could see 4 of his coworkers also clinging to trees. He said later, "I thought the world was coming to an end." Then the wave began to recede, pulling back toward the ocean, and it took everything with it. The receding water pulled him under. He could not hold the branch against the force. He was dragged from the tree and sucked out toward the ocean. He swam as hard as he could. He said, "I could see the hills of Aceh getting smaller." He was already in open water. He was already too far from shore to swim back. He swam and floated for over an hour. His throat was burning from the salt water. He had cuts across his body from the debris. He said, "My throat was burning. The sun was hot. I had cuts all over my body. The salt water was stinging." Then drifting past him, a wooden plank about 5 feet long. He grabbed it. He climbed on. That was day 1. On day 2, a small fishing boat floated by, damaged but still floating. He climbed in. The boat was leaking, but it was better than a plank. He stayed in it for the next 4 days, bailing water to keep it afloat. Around him, the sea was full of bodies and debris from the destruction on shore. He kept his eyes on the horizon. By day 5, the boat was listing badly, the leak getting worse. He had had no fresh water since the tsunami. He said, "After 5 days, I began to lose hope." Ships passed in the distance. None of them saw him. He was too small. The ocean was too large. On day 7, he spotted something, a large fishing raft, unmanned, drifting nearby. He swam to it. The raft was empty. No crew, no rescue, no signal, but it was bigger and more stable than his leaking boat. And on it, he found 2 things that kept him alive: bottles of fresh water and dry clothes. Coconuts were floating in the ocean around the raft, debris from the coastal destruction on shore. He fished them out. The soft ones he husked with his teeth and ate the flesh. For 11 days, coconuts were the only food he had. He had no fishing equipment. He had no fire. He had the raft, the water bottles, and whatever floated past. To keep his mind working, he replayed his favorite movies in his head, Indian films he had seen before. He thought about his elderly parents back in Aceh. He thought about Manchester United and Real Madrid, his favorite soccer teams. He ran through entire matches in his memory. He said he never let himself stop thinking forward. On day 12, the last coconut was gone. He had nothing. For the next 3 days, he had no food. The water in the bottles was running low. His lips were cracked from the sun and the salt. Ships continued to pass in the distance. None of them stopped. On day 15 at dawn, he woke up and saw a container ship heading directly toward him. The Al Yamama, an Arab-registered vessel traveling from Oman to Malaysia. He grabbed his shirt and waved it. He whistled. He shouted in Malay, "Tolong, tolong." "Help, help." The ship's horn sounded. He stood up on the raft. Then the ship kept moving. He sat back down and cried. The ship came back. The captain, John Kennedy, a New Zealander, had ordered his crew to sound the klaxon and circle. A crew member spotted a movement on the raft. They threw Ari a line. He grabbed it. He climbed aboard. He had been alone on the ocean for 15 days. He hugged the captain. Then he fell to his knees on the deck and prayed, and then he sobbed. The first time he had cried in 15 days. Not during the tsunami, not during the nights alone in the ocean, not during the 3 days without food. He had held it together for 15 days. On the deck of the Al Yamama, he let go. He was taken to a hospital in Klang, Malaysia, 75 miles east of Great Nicobar Island, 110 miles north of where the tsunami had swept him out. In the hospital, his roommate was Rizal Shaputra, another Indonesian survivor who had drifted for 8 days after the same tsunami. The 2 men swapped survival stories. Ari Afrizal spent 15 days alone in the Indian Ocean. He is the longest surviving tsunami victim ever recorded at sea. The second longest was Rizal Shaputra in the bed next to him at 8 days. Ari's record is still unbroken. He survived on a wooden plank, a leaking boat, a fishing raft, coconut flesh, and the decision not to stop waiting. Hideaki Akaiwa, the man who went back in. On March 11, 2011, 43-year-old Hideaki Akaiwa was at his workplace outside Ishinomaki, Japan, when the building started shaking. The 9.0 magnitude Tohoku earthquake began at 2:46 p.m. It lasted over 2 minutes. It was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan. Akaiwa had grown up surfing and diving in the coastal waters of Miyagi Prefecture. He owned wetsuits, surfboards, scuba tanks. He had met his wife Hiroko surfing in a local bay 20 years earlier. When the earthquake stopped, he knew what was coming. He called Hiroko. She did not answer. He ran. Other people were running in the opposite direction, toward high ground, away from the coast. Akaiwa ran toward his neighborhood. He reached the edge of the floodwater and stopped. His entire street was submerged, up to 10 feet of water over everything. Emergency workers told him to wait. There was nothing he could do. He did not wait. He found his scuba gear, a wetsuit, oxygen tanks, a mask, suited up, and entered the floodwater alone. Underwater, everything was freezing, pitch dark, and full of moving debris. Shattered cars, downed power lines, collapsed sections of buildings. He swam approximately 660 feet to reach his house. His wife Hiroko had been home when the tsunami hit. She had made it to the upper floor. By the time Akaiwa reached the house, the water was within feet of the second-floor ceiling. There was a small pocket of air left near the top. Barely enough. Hiroko was in it. She had been alone in that shrinking pocket for hours. This was the moment Hideaki Akaiwa chose to survive, and he had made that choice for someone else. He shared his respirator with Hiroko and pulled her out of the house, through 660 feet of dark debris-filled water to the surface. The tsunami hit Ishinomaki approximately 30 minutes after the earthquake. Multiple waves, the first pulling the water back, the second arriving as a wall up to 30 feet high. It traveled 6 miles inland, faster than a person can run. The only survivors in the low-lying areas were those who had found high ground or a rooftop before the water arrived. The water Akaiwa dived into was not standing. It was still moving, cold currents through submerged streets carrying debris. The temperature off the Miyagi coast in March, around 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Hypothermia sets in within minutes without protection. He was in a wetsuit navigating by feel through a neighborhood he knew from the surface, now unrecognizable from below. His mother also lived in Ishinomaki. She had not appeared at any evacuation center. For 4 days, Akaiwa searched on foot and by bicycle, through shelters, through wreckage, through every place she might have gone. He found no sign of her. On day 4, he put the scuba gear back on and went into the floodwater a second time. He found his mother trapped on the second floor of a neighbor's flooded house, still alive, panicking, surrounded by rushing water. He said she was very much panicking. There were rushing waters all around still, and she was trapped in the upper part of the house. He got her out. 4 days after the tsunami, still alive, still findable. After getting his mother out, he did not stop. He wrapped his legs in plastic, got on a bicycle, and rode through the destruction of Ishinomaki every day looking for other survivors. He did this for weeks after the tsunami, long after the official search operations had moved to recovery. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami killed approximately 19,000 people. Ishinomaki was the single hardest-hit city in Japan. Over 3,000 residents killed. Hideaki Akaiwa lost his neighborhood and most of what he owned. He did not lose his wife, he did not lose his mother. Lisbon, 1755. The city that ran to the water. On the morning of November 1st, 1755 at 9:40 a.m., an earthquake of estimated magnitude 8.5 to 9.0 struck off the Atlantic coast of Portugal. It was All Saints' Day, the holiest feast day of the Catholic calendar. Every church in Lisbon was packed. Every candle in the city was lit. In 1755, Lisbon was one of the wealthiest cities in the world. Portugal had an empire. Brazil, India, Africa, the East Indies. Gold poured in from the colonies. The Royal Library held 70,000 volumes. The Ribeira Palace stood at the edge of the Tagus, full of artwork and centuries of royal archives. All of it was in Lisbon that morning. The earthquake lasted between 3 and 6 minutes. Fissures 16 feet wide tore open in the streets. Church roofs collapsed onto the congregations. The candles knocked over by the shaking ignited fires that burned for 6 days. Between 30,000 and 60,000 people died before the tsunami even arrived. The survivors made a choice. They looked at the burning buildings around them and ran toward the harbor. Open sky. No collapsing walls. Room to breathe. Thousands of people gathered at the docks. Families, merchants, priests, aristocrats, all choosing the same escape from the same danger. Then the harbor did something no one had ever seen. The water drained away. The entire Tagus emptied from the shore. The mudflat at the bottom appeared. Centuries of sunken ships, old anchors, lost cargo. Some people on the docks ran toward it. They wanted the treasure. They went toward the retreating water. 3 tsunami waves struck Lisbon approximately 40 minutes after the earthquake. Historical accounts say the first wave arrived so fast that people on horseback galloped at full speed toward high ground and barely made it. Everyone who had stayed at the waterfront was gone. The first wave reached 1.5 miles inland. The lower neighborhoods, Ribeira, Baixa, were submerged. Buildings that had survived the earthquake were knocked down by the water. The wave pulled back, dragging rubble and people into the river. The second and third waves arrived before the first had receded. No time between them. One survivor account described the waterfront moments before the wave. People staring at the exposed riverbed, pointing at centuries of sunken maritime trade. Coins, anchors, old timber. They had no framework for what they were seeing. Nobody in 1755 knew the word tsunami. Nobody in Lisbon had seen one in living memory. They were watching something they had never been told to fear. The people who survived in the lower city were those who had made the opposite choice. They ran uphill. The Alfama district, the oldest and poorest neighborhood in Lisbon, built on a rocky hill above the waterline, survived the tsunami almost completely intact. It was the only part of the lower city that still stood. The King of Portugal, Jose I, survived by accident. His daughter had wanted to spend the holiday outside the city, at the royal country residence in Belém. The court left early that morning. When the earthquake struck, the king was already outdoors in an open field. He was alive because of where his daughter wanted to spend the afternoon. The earthquake so traumatized King Jose I that he never slept inside a walled building again for the rest of his life. He moved the entire royal court to a large tent complex in the hills outside the city. He lived in tents until he died. He had survived the collapse of his capital, and his response was to ensure he was never indoors again. This was the moment Lisbon chose who would survive. Not knowledge, not warning systems. There were none. Just geography and direction. The people on the hill lived, the people at the water died. The difference between the two was a single choice made in the minutes after the ground stopped shaking. 85% of Lisbon's buildings were destroyed by earthquake, tsunami, and the fires that burned for 6 days. The Royal Library, 70,000 volumes, gone. The Ribeira Palace, gone. An entire city's worth of accumulated history erased in one morning. The city that exists in Lisbon's downtown today was built from scratch after 1755. If you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button for more. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and see you in the next one.